Hi, this is Krishna Iyer with the Iyer Think Tank in Delray Beach. This short podcast is on the Iran war. Today is April 3rd. We are on day 34 of this war, and I'm going to just review the few things I read on updates, and I'm also going to go through, I'm going to go through in follow up to my last podcast regarding the U.S. Wars, their war in Iran, and the sadistic schizophrenics, schizophrenic, but certainly mentally deranged American presidents that start these campaigns and do all sorts of racist mass murder against ethnic communities. And Donald Trump is right now in the driver's seat, and he's doing mass murder against Iranian ethnics. And like I said, it's not an American thing to murder Muslims, but it is an American thing to murder ethnic people. Okay, we can say that they are not anti-Muslim, but they are anti-ethnics, and they do cause mass murder of ethnic people. So this is the book. It's called The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. I'm going to just read a short excerpt because you may question, my motives, or why I would, put out the fact that Donald Trump is, a dangerous man, and it's reasonable to question that. I mean, he's crazy, but as presidents go, a lot of presidents are crazy, and nothing happens. But I want to talk about one of the. There was a full discussion about Donald Trump and why we need to, worry about the dangerous man that's sitting in the White House. So just give me 1 second. I will find the, total. Okay, so this is the title of this section is actually Donald Trump, like Hitler, is a psychopath. Okay, remember, you may discount these statements, okay, but I am not, making propaganda and, ethnic fascism or pro-ethnic propaganda. I am telling you that this is a 50 psychiatrist panel that has reviewed and analyzed in detail transcripts, presentations, press conferences and statements, as well as social media that Donald Trump has done. And they have made these statements. And the chapter that I'm reading is Donald Trump, like Hitler, is a psychopath. Okay? The conclusion that they came to is, with his public admission that he intends to be a dictator, saying there will be no more need to vote once he seizes power, the danger from Donald Trump has become lethal for democracy. Trump's exhibiting the most severe characteristics of antisocial personality disorder. His being a psychopath is why he threatens, hurts, debases, and attempts to control others for his own benefit, and why he will never change, but instead will become worse the more power he can seize. Trump is America's Hitler because Trump and Hitler are not only both psychopaths, but Trump has intentionally followed Hitler's plan of endless repetition of big lies, such that the 2020 election was stolen from him. He has repeatedly threatened and criminally acted his way to power through violence and attempts to corrupt the nation's legal and electoral systems. Like other historic scourges of humanity, Trump has shown that he falls far beneath the hallmark of mutual caring and that makes us human. Democracy requires respect and protection from multiple points of view, concepts that are impossible for the psychopaths. If we are to survive as a free country, we all need to understand the depth of psychological illness of Donald Trump and the absence of morality that arises from his most severe mental illness. Okay, now I reviewed Donald Trump's statements, and I found them more in keeping with a delusional and hallucinatory disorder. And I went through all the delusions and hallucinations he has that suggest that he may have schizophrenia or some sort of axis 1 illness that is a psychotic illness. But antisocial personality disorder involves psychosis. So, we can't say for sure which one it is. But, the bottom line is he is a dangerous psychopath, and he is in power, and he is, a racist, mentally deranged, white supremacist, right? I mean, he's hiding a serious mentally deranged white supremacist movement in the United States that is a fascist movement that seeks to recolonize the world and seeks to subjugate all peoples in the world. And I'm going to start with a podcast, actually, every other day. I will be making a podcast every other day, and it's going to be called Putin Shaming Democracy, America's democratic, farcical, racist, sadistic joke, and fascist fraud democracy. And, Putin shaming wars will be another portion of it. The wars, I'm going to compare Ukraine with Vietnam. I'm going to compare Ukraine with the Native American and Apache Indian mass murders. I'm going to compare Georgia with Vietnam and the Apache mass murders. I'm going to compare the South American terror states as well as the Apache genocide in Paraguay, Brazil, and Guatemala, Nicaragua, and El Salvador. America, if you read the stuff, you understand that America shames Russia's Putin. They shame Stalin, and they even shame Hitler. Okay, if you look at the total number of casualties, ethnic murders, mass murders, genocides, and ethnic cleansing that the United States government has performed, it far outdoes Donald Trump. It far outdoes Joseph Stalin, Adolf Hitler, and Vladimir Putin. There's no comparison between these people. America has mass murdered and genocide, including ethnic cleansing of so many populations of people. The indigenous people of the Americas is like over 10 million Indians were slaughtered by the American government when they were here, when they came here in, a vicious campaign of terror. Just overall, they just took the natives and shot them and, executed them, put them in, ditches and all of that stuff. And, if you look at their war, if you look at their other wars against the South Americans, they, entertained police states. They caused police state terror, nonstop murder and assassinations and, beatings and torture and paraplegics and, amputations and, gauging people's eyes out, cutting their arms off, cutting their fingers off. This is the kind of sadistic, schizophrenic and, racist, fraud, violent white supremacy that we need to be understanding America as, and to not understand them as reasoned whites, as rational whites. I mean, we understand very clearly there are many rational whites in the world. I think there are many European countries that have many rational whites. Many of them are, very rational. You read the books, you can read the books about America. They're all whites that write them. They're all, scholars in European universities or in, MIT, an occasional American scholar will write, honest stuff on the American government. But, most of the stuff that comes out of the American government and their big academia is fraudulent. It's just frauds. It's racist frauds. It's propaganda that's patriotic, fascist farce. It's racist, fascist propaganda, patriotism. It's not journalism, it's patriotism. When you see, 1,300 Filipinos thrown into a ditch and then shot, without any question, 1,300 Filipinos gunned down in a war of aggression, and then the ditch covered with dirt so that you hide the bodies, that's called dangerous sadism, okay? That's not normal behavior. That's not an army general that's behaving normally. That's someone with sickness, like mental sickness. And these orders are being transferred from Washington. They're coming from Roosevelt. They're coming from Lyndon Johnson. They're coming from Donald Trump. They came from George Bush. These are the kinds of things we have to understand. These are sickos. These are sickos of white violent supremacy. And until we recognize that, we're not going to understand how to undo this. We're going to keep, being stuck in some, reasoning with the American government. We're all going to accommodate them, compromise. There is no compromise here. You have to say, sir, we're not entertaining you. Do not invade us. And that's it. And you have to protect yourself. You have to get your army out and you have to fight them. There's nothing else to do. This is an American white supremacy, secretive fascist, violent movement of white savages, of the frontiersmen of the American government. These are American frontiersmen hiding sadistic suffering and sadistic murder that have been performed and are being performed by their racist, fascist, patriotic frauds. Okay, and their media doesn't help. Their media covers all of it up. They, hide the real murders, hide the real, the real stories. They pretend that they hallucinate the stories. They present delusions in the media that there's some sort of, Vietnamese, like Soviet troops fighting in Vietnam. Okay, the New York Times, Washington Post are suggesting there were Soviet troops fighting against us, that Lyndon Johnson said there were Soviets fighting against us. The other media stories are that, the Philippines, there's, Filipino natives that are, destroying our people and, threatening our white women and stuff. All of these statements are just fraudulent. They're racist, patriotic, fraudulent propaganda by the white, racist, schizophrenic frauds of the American government, the schizophrenic frauds of the U.S. media, and, the U.S. government that's, feeding it to them to, lie and put stuff around people. So I want to just give you some statements so that you understand, and I'm going to go into this in future, podcasts. We have, World War II came. We understand the U.S. government. We understand that they, were, really not knowing what to do. They were imperialists. They were colonialists. Okay, we all really, accommodated them. We all accommodated them. Hitler was propped up by the United States of America. No one talks about it, but Hitler was propped up. His eugenics laws and his racism was actually considered less racist than the American Confederate South. So let's, analyze what happened to Hitler. Hitler, did exceed himself, and America did attack Hitler, but, they pretended to be against Hitler. Okay, they, for some reason, whatever reason it was, they realized that it is not strategic to sit around and let this guy continue, and they attacked him. But, after World War II, we see what's happened. We see the white supremacy, the violent, racist, white savages that the American government and its fascist propagandists are putting out there and trying to destroy other countries and, worlds and, colonializing different places. Let's take the white supremacists, world ethnic slavery and oppression, their need for world ethnic slavery and racist oppression. I would hope the Europeans would see the degree of the fascist U.S. government. This is not just Republican or Democrat. This is a fascist U.S. white supremacist, violent, savage movement that is in both administrations. It is coming from an intrinsic aspect of the U.S. government. There is no administration change that precludes this racist, sadistic, possibly schizophrenic, ethnic murders and white supremacist, savage, violent motives. Okay, after World War II, okay, they placed Nazi dictators. The people who saved us from the Nazis took Nazi dictators and installed them in South America. Explain why. Because they wanted to murder the indigenous people secretly. They had some racist oppression and some need to subjugate the indigenous. And boy, did they do it. They killed over 1 million, Paraguayan Apache Indians. They hid the real hunting of the Indians and the enslavement of Indian children and the rapes, torture, and murders of Indian women when they were in, South America and Paraguay. Okay, whether their real motive for destroying Hitler when he was propped up by them is not clear. What it was is not clear. But what is clear is that a few million Jews, after Hitler was defeated, fell in love with the United States government because they fell in love with the Roman Catholic, sadistic, schizophrenic, mentally deranged frauds. Okay, and unfortunately, they're still in love with them. And that is why we are having, a problem in, American imperialism today. They're using the Jews to, attack lands and take over places and create imperialism and colonialism, take over oil places, getting help by their murder weapons, from the Israeli government. All of these things are happening behind closed doors, and all you need to do is pick up a few books and you'll understand. And there's one thing about book reading. Okay, I read this in a book. It's called Benevolent Assimilation of the Philippines. In this book, the author says that there were 3 reasons why the U.S. government did not, want people to read. Okay, the U.S. government didn't want people to read books. Okay, that was ultimately what the reason was, and it was an anti-intellectual tradition of white supremacy. Okay, it was the frontiersman suspicion of book learning that still exists in America. That frontiersman suspicion still exists in America. Okay, they said the reason is that it's impractical to read books, unnatural, and elitist to read books. Okay, so, it's impractical. You buy a book and you sit down and read it. What is impractical about that? But ethnic slaughter is practical, right? Ethnic murder of the Vietnamese is practical in the terms of a genocide. That's practical. Murdering and genociding the South American Indians as well as the native Indians is a practical action. Okay, let's see the other one. Unnatural to read books. So ethnic slaughter of the Vietnamese, Laotians, and Cambodians is natural. It's natural to, sadistically slaughter 10 million people from Indochina. It's necessary to sadistically slaughter, millions of Indians in South America. It's natural to do that. The final thing is elitist. So it's elitist to read books. So then ethnic slaughter in Indochina is not elitist. Ethnic slaughter in, South America is not elitist. Ethnic slaughter all over the world is not elitist. We have to ask these questions. These questions are very important because they are being shown all over the place. Okay, books are the only source of knowledge, and the U.S. government is trying to phase these books out. It's trying to censor these books, and it's trying to kill people who read these books. And that is a dangerous, fascist, violent, white supremacist movement that we are up against. Okay, and I am telling you, I wouldn't be surprised if, the U.S. government were to knock on my door and open fire with a machine gun and say, you're not allowed to read books. That's the way I view their racist, sadistic frauds. Okay, they are, racist, sadistic frauds. I will never stop reading books. I will die before I stop reading books. And let them know that. Let them know that I will never stop reading books. And I will write a book about their frauds and their sadistic racists in my own, interpretation of their history. So, we have to understand that is, an important aspect. Now, they replaced, now we were wanting to talk about just shortly the South Americans. They replaced indigenous land with South African apartheid racists in Uruguay during the Indian, relocation movement. They were put on reservations, and there was a large amount of land that the Uruguayan government was holding for the Indians. The U.S. government, using their German friends in the public, as well as their clout at a government level, forced the Uruguayan government to give up that land to the South African apartheid racists that nobody else in the world was willing to take. Don't tell me that that's not a racist action of a white, violent, vengeful fraud. Okay, that is a savage white supremacist that has no business to, they're just a genocider. There's a group of genociders, a racist group of white genociders that wanted to murder the Uruguayans, put them in, reservations and slaughter them just like they did. And they did it secretly without anyone knowing about it. And there's another book. We got another book. It's called Genocide in Paraguay. I recommend strongly purchasing this book. It's another genocide about the U.S. government frauds and, mass murderers of humanity. They, genocided them. They enslaved the children. They murdered the women and the children. That is not a sadist. That's a Putin and Hitler shaming group of racist, assassin, white supremacists of the American government. Okay, so, we also want to just point out one thing real quick is that, they pretended about interest in helping the Chinese. All right, they pretended by going there, re-helping, like giving some military aid to Chiang Kai-shek. And the Chinese complained for, about 4 years. Mao Zedong kept saying, we don't have any problem working with you, American. But Chiang Kai-shek is a murderer. He's a murderer. He's a human rights abuser. He's a gangster. He's a hoodlum. We can't work with him. He's too sadistic and too dangerous. What did the American government do? They kept supplying weapons. They said, fuck you. Here's more money. Here, take more money, take more money, take more money. Over and over again. They gave Chiang Kai-shek hundreds and thousands and millions of dollars to prop up his nationalist army and slaughter communists. Now, why would a group of people think that, that's helpful? I mean, why would we say that we're trying to help out in post-war in China? That, to me is sneaky. And then following that, after the Frenchmen had been kicked out of Vietnam, they slowly went to Vietnam and found that the slavery privilege that, the Vietnamese were being, taken out is now they wanted to replace the French. The Vietnamese and the Laotians and Cambodians and Indochina, the Indochinese were being enslaved by the French. And so they fought a civil war with the French and beat them. And so they were independent. France wanted to independent them, make them independent. United States went in and started a war of aggression against Indochina and slaughtered, 15 million people. Okay, 15 million people. The end point of Lyndon Johnson's war is genocide. The end point is genocide. What is the end point, Mr. Johnson? It's a win policy. But Mr. Johnson, a win policy is genocide. Then he said, well, who are you fighting this war with, Mr. Johnson? He said, we're fighting the Vietnamese people. Okay, so this is a sadistic, mentally deranged, schizophrenic. I mean, he's a mentally deranged, schizophrenic. He displays all the signs, hallucinations and delusions. So, now you went to Indochina and you slaughtered all the people and you wanted to take over. You made more and more bases in Southeast Asia so that you can get rid and enslave the Chinese. So, it's so uncanny to me, but it's very dangerous to believe that the U.S. did this all out of the interest of uplifting the Indo-Chinese and the Chinese. I believe the U.S. did this because they wanted to re-enslave the Chinese and they wanted to re-enslave the Indo-Chinese with, basically racist oppression. They didn't like the freedom that the Chinese had, and they had, additional things like jealous delusions that, the Chinese are getting more money and this independence is going to cause all sorts of problems for them. They had all sorts of delusions. They had all sorts of delusions of, basically they had persecutory delusions of communism, of Soviets, taking over Indochina and China. Soviet Union wasn't even involved. Soviet Union had nothing to do. Stalin was nowhere to be seen when it came to Indochina and China. So these were jealous delusions and, persecutory delusions that there was some sort of Soviet communist takeover. There were persecutory and there were visual hallucinations that Soviet troops were spreading communism in Vietnam, and auditory hallucinations that Soviet bombs were exploding in Vietnam, jealous delusions of Chinese communists having more money and power than us, and erotomanic delusions of Vietnamese having a love affair with the Chinese communists. So, I can say that, for definite, even if you want to say that, America had good intentions after World War II, they have been hiding. The reason for their intentions have come seriously into question after this Iran war. And, whether it's because they are, seeking to, slaughter ethnics and create, a population of whites that is greater than the ethnic population, some sort of endpoint of, slaughter, like sadistic slaughter to reach an endpoint, just like in Vietnam, where genocide was the endpoint. Maybe they're looking for genocide of certain populations in the world, but there is some sort of sadistic motive behind the U.S. government's, continuous wars of aggression. And if we don't ask those questions, and if we leave it open-ended like that, we're missing a lot, and we subject everyone to re-struggles and re-colonialization for people who have already suffered and dealt with the colonialists and kicked them out and redid their lands the way they wanted to do their lands. And now it's, attempt to colonialize colonialism, just like Venezuela. Who knows what they're going to do next? Maybe Brazil will be next. Maybe Chile will be next. These are racist white savages, white violent supremacist savages that are hiding serious motives in their aggression in the Islamic Republic of Iran. And like I said, the most recent things in Iran have been pretty straightforward. There are, really no differences, no changes. What's going on day 35 of the attacks. The U.S. has, continued attacks, ramping up attacks. The conflict is spread. U.S. fighter jet was shot down. Hegseth fired one of his generals. Intensifying strikes. There were, Central Medical Research Center in Tehran was hit. The Pasteur Institute was hit. Steel plants were hit. A bridge was hit. Infrastructure has collapsed. A drone strike hit a Red Crescent. This is all destruction of civilian infrastructure. They're destroying the Iranian, civilian society in their war of aggression against Iran. And, this is a group of sadistic, schizophrenic frauds. And again, with respect to Donald Trump and his war in Iran, I say, read this book, the much more dangerous case of Donald Trump. 50 psychiatrists, and mental health experts warn anew about Donald Trump's racist wars of aggression and his dangerous authoritarian dictatorship and his mental health illness. Whether it's schizophrenia, antisocial disorder, histrionic or narcissistic disorder, or a combination, he has a serious debilitating mental illness that needs urgent mental treatment, and he should not be allowed to do any further intervention and racist actions in Iran. And I strongly urge people to get this book and be worried about what's going to happen next in Iran. Again, Krishna Iyer, I'll put the Zoom link I'll put the description in the description section. I'll put the books in the description section. Have a great day. Krishna Iyer with the Iyer Think Tank. Please join me for future podcasts on, Putin versus the United States. Putin's shaming wars of the United States. American racist wars are no comparison. They are championship butchers of ethnics. Putin has done nothing in Ukraine and, Georgia and Chechnya compared to the U.S. government's racist wars of aggression against all of the different people. The racist war in Vietnam, their indigenous racist war, and all of the racist wars across the world. Putin versus the United States. It goes down, hands down, the championship racist, patriotic fraud, sadistic white supremacist, United States of America, championship white supremacist, racist frauds of mass murder. Great job, Krishna Iyer with the Iyer Think Tank in Delray Beach. Have a nice day.